Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis session. Today we'll be discussing 7 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, a very important announcement for anybody who's preparing for 2025. The UAIPMT is back, and on 9th of February at 9:30 for GS paper 1 and CSAT examination at 2:30 p.m. you have a chance to check the level of your preparation. So the Unacademy All India Prelims mock test is here, and there are 2 to 3 things which you need to understand. You will get an All India rank. The questions are quite representative, and this will allow you in a way to understand everything and understand your preparation in the larger context of things. So this is a very important announcement for anybody who's preparing for 2025. Further, the PPT you will find in this Telegram channel. You just have to scan it and you will be able to download it, and therefore everything which I'm talking about with the annotations is available on the platform also. Good morning to all of you. I have the chats here. I'll keep on referring to your questions also. Now, the 7 topics we cover today is a good mix of topics. First is the jobs which we need for Viksit Bharat. This is based on the budget. There was something very specific mentioned by the finance minister. We will talk about that. Then we'll talk about ethanol blending and ethanol production in India, and maize being a very important, you can say, indicator or a new game changer in that regard. Then we'll talk about 3 things which are related to Donald Trump. A standard protocol which is going to happen now with regards to WHO. Why did he go out of WHO? Then we'll talk about the tariff wars which he started with Canada, Mexico and China. 2 topics related to that. And then very interestingly, the Supreme Court intervening into the definition of a forest. And last but not the least, we have BENU, or what we call as OSIRIS-REx program of NASA. It has given us quite interesting insights into what the asteroid has. So we will discuss the 7 topics in the next hour or so, and we'll try to understand because most of these topics are related to mains, we'll try to have a theoretical and deep understanding of these topics. Now, the first topic which we have to cover says the kind of jobs needed for Viksit Bharat. This word Viksit Bharat was the go-to word for the finance minister throughout the budget session itself. In a very important way, she talked about 3 types of jobs which need to be created in the long run, because if we create jobs which are not in a way aligned with the global headwinds, aligned with what is needed at this point of time, we will not be able to create real wage growth and any form of long-term growth with regards to employment. So though we have an issue of unemployment in India, but now when we create jobs, they have to in a way be dictated by 3 very important factors. Now, what are the 3 factors which are there? First, she says that climate change, and the author also points out that climate change and climate resilience is very important. The second which they talk about is what is the impact of AI on jobs, and last is the aspect of aspiration and entrepreneurship. So therefore, let's try to understand each of these heads properly, and he has given multiple examples on how we can undercut it. Now let's talk about the first concept, which is climate resilience. We know that climate change impacts everyone, every country in that regard, but India is the 7th most affected country by climate change in 2019. The data used by the author is a little bit old but still relevant, and it is argued by the RBI that by 2030 India will need $1 trillion to adapt to the climate change issues which are coming up as of right now. And therefore India has to now make sure that when it creates the new jobs or whatever job market we have to make sure that it takes into account climate change, sustainability and a greener path. Now the examples are not that groundbreaking, but is equally interesting. For example, he says that when we are now creating jobs, we should always and in a way keep EVs in mind. For example, last mile connectivity in India is mostly a problem. You can reach to the station, but from the station to the village is a problem. Now here he says that, for example, we can invest in what we call as e-rickshaws. E-rickshaws with women drivers or men drivers, this has the potential to create close to 2 million jobs, 20 lakh jobs, and this will be climate proof. The problem in that understanding is because this independent researcher is talking about a lot of new things, rural India already has a electricity crisis. Though we have connectivity with regards to electricity, still charging those EVs is a very big question. So, though we talk about climate resilience, this is not a good solution because in a village setup, in a rural setup, electricity is already a premium, and therefore, when we talk about such kinds of solution, it may be a problem. The second type of solution which he says, or in that regard was also talked about, is biogas plants. India only has 1/10 of the biogas plants which were actually thought about. Here we can allow private investment to come through and people can then get involved in biogas production, which could also create jobs. And the most relevant example which has been given is rather what we today call as rooftop solar. When we talk about rooftop solar can do two things. First, create that sector climate resilient, also give us electricity, also make it green, and also create a skilled workforce which can then service these rooftop solars. So the idea which the budget has talked about is we have to now be very clear what type of skill and what type of job we are creating. If we don't take climate change into account, then we are creating jobs which more or less are useless. More or less are useless because over a period of time, they will then be subsumed or become redundant or become obsolete. So this is the first thing which we have to understand. The second thing which the author talks about is the idea related to AI. Now, India is a service-based economy, and that service-based economy is threatened by artificial intelligence because chatbots in that regard are the future. And with regards to DeepSeek, with regards to OpenAI, AI is going to impact a lot of the jobs in India. Close to 50% plus automation potential is there with regards to AI. And there's a McKinsey report which says that the Indian IT and business services in a way could be compromised or contract because of the AI based understanding, though again based on a very old economic survey. But the idea is with AI, BPOs, service centers, these things will start to contract, and therefore we have to take into account that employment potential will be impacted by AI. It has already seen a contraction. The labor potential and the labor need is going down with regards to AI. Therefore, we have to make sure that we go into certain sectors where AI cannot replace the person. So, with regards to service-based economy, with regards to IT, we can already see that there is a lot of coding, a lot of basic tasks which the AI is doing. However, there are 4 sectors which they identify. For example, education. You can bring in as many AI tools as possible, but in education, the labor, the person, the human remains important. And therefore, education is a very important sector which can be talked about like this in a way that this is where we have to push in our youth. Further, healthcare. Again, healthcare has its, both these sectors have their own problems, but these are 2 sectors in which human to human interaction will always remain there. And therefore, human to human interaction will then make sure that the AI tools will be supplementary to the humans rather than replacing the humans itself. Further, they argue that agriculture and artisanal work also has to be taken into account, because here again, when we talk about handicrafts, when we talk about agriculture again, AI can help predict a lot of things, but the agriculture itself has to be done by the farmer. So basically, agri sector, artisanal sector, handicrafts, education and healthcare are sectors where we have to create jobs, we have to push in more jobs so that AI based, what we call as automation, cannot take the jobs away. This is again a very, very important consideration, very, very important consideration which has to be taken into the understanding before any form of job is created. The third point which is made is aspiration centric. See, as much we as talk about this concept of entrepreneurship, of startup culture, but the problem is in rural India, this aspiration is based on a lot of deep insecurities, which is because of the English education aspect with regards to resource deprived upbringing and with regards to infrastructural problems. There is a lot of issues in creating jobs in the rural sector, which is based on self-employment or entrepreneurship. Therefore, what they argue is we have to make sure, for example, National Mission on Edible Oil, for example, the Makhana board which is being talked about, Makhana board, edible oil, we have to create an environment in which even rural youth try to find it comfortable to enter into the market as entrepreneurs, understand the market also. Therefore, there's a need for skilling. And that skill needs to be imparted at the school level, at the level of colleges, that it is okay, there is a certain way you perform in a certain market. They have to understand the capitalistic market. They have to understand the flows of the capitalistic market. In that regard, it is very, very important. So therefore, the three considerations on which this article was based on is that you have to take into account that there's an infrastructure gap. There's a gap, there is resource deprivation, and therefore we have to make sure that the rural youth understands entrepreneurship. Second, AI is a very big problem with regards to labor automation. We have to make sure we create jobs which are based on certain aspects which AI cannot take away. And last but not the least, climate resilience has to be taken into account, because if you're creating jobs, for example, you are creating a certain job sector in which only diesel or petroleum is used, you are making that job obsolete in the long run. And therefore, you have to create a workforce which has the skill set to be climate resilient, to be sustainable, to be AI proof, and also understand entrepreneurship, which is very, very important. So there are 4 to 5 things which the budget talked about. In Bihar specifically, they've talked about a Makhana board coming up. Makhana is the new important sector which they're identifying, and therefore edible oil imports are quite high. I'll talk about one more concept, which is maize with regards to ethanol, with regards to Makhana. These are things which the government of India itself is identifying are very interesting sectors in which entrepreneurship can happen. For example, Makhana has a lot of potential to be monetized, and therefore that is a job which could help in the long run. So you have to understand one thing very, very clearly, that the new job market has to be taken into consideration. I have previously also talked about this on the same platform, that we have to skill or upskill our, you can say, youth in such a way that we understand what is the skill set needed. If we are still going for ITI based on old concepts and old technology, it will make no sense whatsoever. So there are 4 to 5 points which have been made, which is 3 set of jobs. You have to now remember these 3 sets of consideration, how these 3 set of consideration help us understand how the new job market is going to develop. Now, you can get a question like this in the examination. Viksit Bharat needs a new generation and philosophy of jobs in India. Discuss. Very interesting question, very straightforward question, which in turn can help you understand that Viksit Bharat is now going to be a go-to word for the government. Now, how do you make Bharat Viksit, or in a way go forward, is by not creating jobs which are going to become obsolete 10, 15, 20 years down the line. We have to create jobs. This is the main point which has to come through. This is the type of jobs which you have to create in such a way that are in a way climate resilient, AI, and in a way entrepreneurship based. Do we understand this concept, everyone? Are we sorted with regards to this? Yes? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that discussion. Okay, let's move to the second topic, which is how will the government produce the required ethanol? See, there's something called E10 petrol. I don't know if you've ever paid attention. When you go to now any gas station, what they will give you is called E10 petrol. India is going to achieve E20 petrol very soon, within the next 2 months. 1 year before what was targeted. Now that E10 and E20, actually what it means is ethanol 10%, ethanol 20%. Now, ethanol is a biofuel, and ethanol blending does two things. We are a petroleum importing country, and therefore we do not have petroleum resources which we can produce ourselves. In turn, we import a lot of or most of our petroleum. Now, ethanol can be produced within Indian boundaries. We have the resources to do that. And if we are able to blend ethanol with petrol, it can allow us to reduce the number or the liters of petrol which we are actually importing. Therefore, by ethanol blending, that 10 to 20%, Indian government can save a lot of money, and we as consumers will also be transferred that benefit in the concept of price of petrol itself. E20 means 10% more ethanol to be added into your vehicles. That is a game changer, because if we can increase the percentage of ethanol more and more into the petroleum without taking it away efficiency and performance, it could allow India to become more and more fuel sufficient, and fuel security, energy security is going to be very, very important. Now, here there are 2 to 3 static concepts which you have to understand, which is ethanol can be produced in multiple generations, meaning first generation ethanol, second generation ethanol, third generation ethanol, or fourth generation ethanol. And more than that, because most of this ethanol blending which we are talking about is first generation ethanol, we have to make sure where does that ethanol actually come from. So, Nitin Gadkari has recently pointed out that we will hit 20% ethanol blending target very soon, and that too 1 year before what we had to. But the total demand of ethanol, therefore, with E20 petrol is 1,100 crore liters of ethanol. Basically, in 1 year, we will need 1,100 crores liters of ethanol. Now, the question is, where will this ethanol come from? That is the most important question here. Now, this ethanol, which Nitin Gadkari is referring to, which India is producing, is basically a first generation ethanol. First generation ethanol are made out of edible biomass, meaning sugar, rice, maize, or wheat. Maize is corn. Then second generation ethanol is out of biomass which is non-edible, which is wood, straw, grass, waste. But the best form of ethanol are third and fourth generation, one based on algae and the other one based on what we call as solar to fuel. But this is experimental phase. This is available but cannot be scaled. This can be done but is not resource efficient. India is very good in doing this, which is first generation ethanol. Now, how do you produce ethanol? Ethanol goes a very simple, straightforward process. You take the crop, you ferment it, you purify it, you get ethanol. Then ethanol is added to the petroleum. You get E10 petrol, which is taken to the petroleum station. Now, India, as of right now, is using pure first generation ethanol because it is using 3 sources to get the ethanol from. Either it is based on sugar, either it is based on rice, or it is based on maize or corn. Therefore, all of this 1,100 crore liters of fuel which is coming through is either sugar, either high grade molasses, which is gur or jaggery, and or FCI rice or maize. And India's potential to produce ethanol has reached 1,600 crore liters as of right now. Now, I'm going to ask you this question very simply. Will more and more ethanol production have an impact on food security if we are on this trajectory because it is based on rice and sugar? Yes or no? What is the answer to that question? If we keep on producing first generation crop or first generation ethanol based crop, will it have an impact? Yes, very good. It will, because you are using sugar, you are using rice, and you're using maize, which in turn would have gone into food production or food consumption. Now, understand one thing. Out of this, corn is a resilient crop. Corn can be produced in arid zones also, but rice is a water intensive crop and sugar is also a very water intensive crop. Sugarcane is extremely dangerous as a crop when it comes to water. So rice, paddy fields and sugarcane both need a lot of water. Maize is a little bit more climate resilient, a better crop in that regard. Now this is where the article says it is important that we understand where do we get the ethanol from. The idea is very simple. If we are getting the maize or if we are getting the ethanol from sugar and rice, it could be dangerous in the long run. Now, what is the production capacity as of right now? And then we'll talk about maize. If you look at the production capacity as of right now, 400 crore liters of ethanol comes from sugar. Comes from sugar, which is diverted out of food production into this zone. And as of right now, most of our ethanol blending happens because of sugar. Thereafter, the second most important source which is available is the FCI rice. FCI has reduced the rice price at which it will give it to distilleries in which they will ferment and get ethanol. But this is where the second most important source of ethanol comes from. But in 2020, we used to have 0 liters coming from maize. But in the last 4 years, there has been a jump in ethanol produced through maize or through what we call as corn. This is a very important source because corn has the potentiality to reduce the dependence on sugar, reduce the dependence on rice, and increase the production on maize. Now, why am I saying that maize is a game changer? Because maize is a better crop to produce ethanol out of. It is still not desirable because it is still an edible crop. But the idea is sugarcane and rice are two, you can say, sources of ethanol which are climate negative, meaning they need a lot of water, and that ethanol therefore is not making us carbon positive, it is mostly making us carbon negative. On the other hand, when we talk about ethanol itself coming from maize, maize is a better crop. This is where the concept of maize now changing the landscape is very, very important. See, maize is used in multiple sectors in India. One in poultry sector, then in livestock sector, starch production, and 10% is there for human consumption, meaning we consume 10% of all maize produced, other 90% goes into these different sectors. Now what happened was that in 2020 and 21, the government of India put in a lot of regulation. So now obviously that was needed, which is government in a way curbed the number of or the liters of ethanol which could be produced through sugar. So basically sugar, molasses and rice based ethanol, there were capping which came through. If not, because it is more, you can say, economically lucrative to push sugar into ethanol production, this would create a sugar shortage in the market itself. And this is where government of India started to then introduce certain capping. And that is actually needed. But the point was, by doing this, where would the deficit be met? And in India, what started to happen was maize imports in India skyrocketed beyond exception. Between April and June of 2024, 100 crores worth of maize was imported, while in 23-24, this was approximately $33 million. So very simply, we went from $33 million to $188 million, and maize now was the next most important commodity when it came to import. Now, this import was because of impulsive change from rice and sugar to maize. But as it turns out, India has a proper belt in Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. All of these states have the potentiality to ramp up their maize production, and we have seen that because it is better, it is more lucrative, all the farmers in these states have actually responded to the need for maize for ethanol production. And what has now been argued by the ICAR is that if we go at the trajectory of maize production we are doing today, we will meet all the demand of maize which is needed for ethanol blending rather than importing it. And this is very important because this makes us self-sufficient. If we can produce the maize for the poultry sector, for the livestock sector, for human consumption, and also for ethanol blending, it makes us self-sufficient. And this is where maize is turning out to be a very important game changer in the ethanol blending market. Further, there is a question which people have talked about, is that with so much ethanol blending, it could also be that maize diverted out of food sector into non-food use could in turn lead to also crises within the livestock sector, in the poultry sector. But as it turns out, when you produce ethanol, there's something called distillers dried grains with solubles, DDGS, which is produced. This can be pushed into the poultry sector. So the byproduct of ethanol production out of maize is good enough for poultry sector, and therefore the availability of ethanol based on maize has other advantages also. Now let's do one thing. Let's try to bring all of this together, and a very important, you can say, conclusion comes through. The conclusion is, by actually pushing ethanol into petrol, the government of India stands to benefit by 6,000 crores in the import substitution which it is doing. Now, what is the whole argument here before we move to the question? The whole argument is very simple. E10 petrol is already available. E20 petrol is now going to be available very soon. Ethanol blending into petroleum is important because that allows for India to create a certain energy space in which it can then have sources of fuel which are not being imported. India is import dependent when it comes to any form of fuel. Petroleum is a very big Achilles heel for the Indian economy itself. Now you can get ethanol from either sugar, rice or maize. We are right now having 60 to 70% of the production out of sugar and rice, but these two are important resources for human consumption within food security itself. And therefore, we cannot divert more if we want to go for E30 or E40 petrol, which is ethanol blending 30-40%. 1100 crore liters is the demand. We have the potentiality to produce 1600 crores, but that is based on rice and sugar. This is where maize is turning out to be a very interesting and a game changer crop, because maize has the potentiality to substitute the ethanol which is produced from sugar and corn and in turn allow us to blend more, because maize byproduct out of ethanol blending or ethanol production is also used in poultry sector, and India has the potentiality to produce all the maize which is needed for ethanol blending. It makes us more secure. Energy security comes through, and India can then produce more and more ethanol and then reduce the imports itself, which creates a corpus of money which can then be pushed into this sector again, and the surplus amount which is available to the government of India can then be diverted to other aspects of Indian economy. That is where you can get this type of question. Yes, corn is also climate resilient. There are multiple forms of corn and maize. Climate resilient needs less water, needs less fertilizers, and is more climate resilient in the larger context. Maize as a crop is a game changer for ethanol production and blending sector. Comment. This is going to be a question which is going to come for sure in the foreseeable future, because with E20 petrol in the market, this topic is going to become important. You need to know why maize is becoming more and more important, like go-to word for the government. And over and above all of this, it is equally important to understand that this is a better path to energy security. So the first two topics, we talked about two very interesting things. Rice husk can then be pushed still into livestock fodder. Maize production specifically, I'll give you a very simple example. There is a lot of production which is happening today in Karnataka with regards to corn, which is not for edible purposes. The farmers have very well responded to ethanol production based maize. They are producing, the yield is higher, it needs less input, it is more resilient, and therefore anything based on rice comes from paddy production, and paddy needs a lot of water. Corn does not need that much water. This is where the whole concept is very revolutionary. Maize can be, though India should think of second generation ethanol blending, or second generation ethanol production itself, which is rice, straw, and what is called as wood. That wood again is a problem, but the byproducts which is coming out of what we call as agricultural produce, which does not need a lot of water. It's about the carbon footprint of that fuel. Carbon footprint of maize is less than carbon footprint of what we call as rice or sugar. That is the basic argument which this article is also trying to make. Maize can be the next future when it comes to the ethanol blending market in India. That is what the question is also asking. So are we on the same page with regards to this? First topic, we discussed the concept of climate resilient, AI-based, AI resilient and new generation of what we call as jobs. And second, we've understood the concept of maize and what we call as a ethanol blending market, which is evolving. Okay, perfect. Now let's move to Trump. The first topic which we are going to talk about is why did Trump leave the WHO? First, we'll talk about WHO, then we'll talk about the concept of what we today call as the tariff wars which he started, what is the implication of that, and then we move to the next topic. So the next three articles are based on Trump. Now, since Trump has come to power, he's done a lot of things. We already know. Yesterday itself I discussed how he's trying to change the citizenship model from just solely to just genuine. That's a separate issue altogether. But the first executive order, the first set of executive orders which he produced, the most important concept which he introduced, which he argued, was that because of COVID-19 handling and because WHO is biased towards China, I am going to withdraw from the WHO and I am going to also stop all funding to the WHO. The World Health Organization is an important body, but the question was, how did people allow Trump to come to this solution or this conclusion, and what is the sentiment of the people in America with regards to this concept itself? This is what this data point article tries to point out. Now, the first argument which this article is giving is that if you look at the sentiment of people in America with regards to a question which was posed to them, which is WHO handling of the pandemic was somewhat good, somewhat bad, or very good. The perception in America is totally polarized, which is 53%, mostly Democrats will argue that the handling was good, whilst 44 to 45% of the population argues that COVID-19 was not handled properly, and in turn, the bias of the WHO towards China led to the mishandling of COVID-19 by the WHO. Now, this is pure based on perception, meaning WHO had not seen something like this previously, a pandemic at the scale of COVID-19, that too which spreads through what we call as an airborne disease, human to human contact. And let's be very honest, the more torpedoing of this issue and the complication of this issue was because of Trump himself, which is from asking people to inject bleach, to be a vaccine denier, to creating a vaccine blockade when he himself also got infected by COVID-19. It still did not make him understand that it is not an ordinary common flu. He himself complicated the path of America during COVID-19. But that is where he has shifted the blame out of himself to say that the WHO did not handle it properly. And this is where his supporters believe that leaving the WHO makes sense because it is a China body. As he says, it is biased towards China and very handled or mishandled COVID-19 throughout that period. Again, no precedence for us to understand mishandling. WHO did what it needed to do. Yes, there were, you can say, lethargic or very lukewarm response to multiple things. But the point was COVID-19 was a novel virus, a novel situation. So the idea is very simple. The perception in America as of right now is WHO handled it bad. Close to 50% believe that it did not do well. And vis-a-vis, for example, Germany, Canada, UK, this number is very, very high, where you have 30% people arguing that Japan and South Korea are on the totally different spectrum, where they say that they did not manage it properly, with 80% and 67% of the people saying that they did not manage it well. America sits in the middle but allows Trump to have this rhetoric. The second point which is made is that how many percent of Americans, in a way, said that US benefited out of being part of the WHO landscape and structure. This is where again, if you look at it, not too much and not at all is a very big number. The red bars which you see, 22% and 17%, close to, again, 40-45% of the people believe that they have not benefited anything. A very interesting point, when this question was asked in 2021, the numbers were lower and people believe that they have benefited. But between these 3 years, the perception has shifted. The perception has shifted with regards to saying that we have not benefited too much. So during the pandemic and just after it, people believe that WHO is doing good work. Again, Biden administration effect also. But in the past 3 years, what has happened is that the perception has flipped and there is more and more understanding that we did not get anything out of WHO. Let us leave WHO in that regard. That is what Trump absorbed. That is what his people also want. If I go further and analyze these 4 different charts, you get a very interesting set of understanding. And these 3 are very, very important. These 3. This tells you that a Republican is half as likely to say that WHO is a good institution. Democrats are supporting, 80% Democrats believe that WHO is an important body, we have to be a part of it. Trump did not do this for the first time. He removed the US from WHO in 2020 also, but Biden administration undercut that. But the idea is this time he's done it in the first 2 months of his, you can say, presidentship. This is where the Democratic and the Republican understanding comes through. But this is the 2 alarming concepts. If I look at the percentage of funding which the WHO gets from America, there is no other power in the world as of right now which comes close to that much level of funding. In 2016-17, out of 100% of the money which WHO gets, 17.8% came from the US, then it went down to 16.2%, then just after the COVID-19 pandemic and because of Trump, it went to 8.9%. Then again under Biden, it became 16.3%, and as of right now, it is at 14.6%, which is averages out close to 12 to 15% of the money is coming from the US. The next best power is giving 5% of that money. 3 times more US is giving. And the money which US gives, out of that 26% is used for improving the quality of health. 21% is used to understand acute emergencies. Polio eradication 20%. Epidemics and pandemic preparedness 10%. Respond to health emergencies is close to 7%. Don't have to learn this. But the idea is the money which they give is used in critical concepts. Are used in critical concepts with regards to WHO. And with Trump exiting WHO, this 15% of revenue stream of the WHO will be gone. Now, this is where WHO will start to struggle. Close to 72 collaborative or corroborating centers were also America-based, and most of the secretariat of WHO is based on Americans. So very simply, this has a very big implication on WHO itself, because WHO is losing its human resources, losing its money, losing its centers, and all of that was used to be pandemic prepared for better health, better emergencies preparedness, and polio eradication. This is where WHO may now start to struggle, and no other power has that much hegemonic power, as it is called, or that much capacity to meet this 15%. And this is where forever, if this is implemented at the scale at which Trump is arguing, with climate skepticism, with this WHO, you can say anti-WHO stance, maybe WHO starts to struggle as an institution, and this has an implication for India which is trying to eradicate tuberculosis. WHO does very good work in India, has its own problems also, but India is a very important body with regards to the WHO itself. India and China don't have the capacity to push in that much amount of money which America used to push. These are also considered American institutions, WTO, WHO, UN, IMF, dominated by the superpower called America. In a way, Cold War politics, you can say, fallout or cascading impact. But the idea is very simple. The idea is that this amount of money not going to the WHO will have a very big impact. This is a developing story. This is a developing story. Let us see where it goes. But this is again the Pandora's box of America and Trump-based politics. This is not good for the world in any way or form. If this was not enough, I hope you understand the point of this article. Very interesting. Data point is always interesting. Yesterday we had a discussion with regards to what we call as another data point article, but this one is more interesting because it talks about how Trump was able to do what he was able to do. Now, if this was not enough, Trump has also started a trade war. Before that, you can get a question on WHO GS paper 3 saying the US exit from the WHO may fundamentally change the global healthcare landscape. Meaning, if America is not going to be within the WHO space, this in turn could mean that the global healthcare landscape, which was dominated by the WHO, will then start to struggle. And if that is going to be the case, then India as a nation would have to also take into consideration multiple other things, which is, will there be now bilateral, what we call as understanding, which is going to develop? Will there be a mini multilateral institution which is going to come up with like-minded nations? Can the world survive without the US pushing so much money into the WHO? These are questions which need to be answered, but there is no answer as of right now. Trump is in his that high-handed approach, and that high-handedness also led to this, which is tariff turmoil. As we speak today, in the past 2 days, America has started to weaponize tariffs. This was something, it's an international body, means that it is global in that regard. See, tariff barriers was something which was always used as a way of protecting one's economy. The best example is the Great Depression was created because of America creating tariff barriers, then Europe creating tariff barriers, consumerism, crash in economy, Great Depression of 1929-32. But what Trump is actually doing is he's weaponizing tariffs, meaning I want to punish you, so therefore I am going to create a tariff barrier or a tariff structure which is going to disincentivize imports from you. The 3 countries were already on his, you can say, hit list: China, Canada and Mexico. Canada because of Trudeau, Mexico because of his alien concept that everybody, all criminals are coming from the southern border. China because of his general, that is good for India but not for the good for the supply chain in that regard. He has a general, you can say, negative perception of China. And when the reporters asked that is there any other country which you are going to in a way consider, he did not talk about a country. He said EU is next. EU is next. That is where Kaja Kallis comes through, that she said that if EU is on the cards, China is the one which is going to benefit. Now let's try to understand what is the concept here. Trump has created tariff barriers against these 3 countries as a way of punishing them. 3 executive orders, 25% increased tariff on Canada and Mexico, and 10% tariff only on Canadian energy, 10% on goods from China. So 10 and 10, Canadian energy is important, so 10%, but goods coming from Canada and Mexico, 25%. This is a very big hike. 25%, 10% hike in tariff could change the whole concept itself, which is what could be coming from $1 or could be sold for $1 would now go to $5 to $6, which is a very big increase. And therefore, the price competitiveness of commodities coming from these 3 countries is going to go down. Now, as of right now, there was a conversation with the Mexican president, which has offsetted this tariff for the next 1 week. And Beijing has said that this is a farce, this is wrong, you cannot do this, wrongful practice. It is saying that we'll take this to the WTO. As it is, Trump does not actually care about the WTO. You know that. Trump is the last person who you can threaten by saying that I will go to this and that body. He doesn't care. He can exit from WTO also. But the idea is, Beijing is saying that you cannot take away the concept of most favored nation. Trump said, I don't care. The idea is he doesn't care about multilateral institutions. I have already talked about this concept. He believes in the idea that multilateral institutions take away sovereignty. And therefore, he believes in undercutting multilateral institutions. So Beijing is saying we'll go to WTO. Best of luck with that. The second thing is Mexico City and Ottawa, which is Canada and Mexico, is trying to manage it. Mexico has brokered a deal that for 1 week, let us give some time. And Canada, they're trying to figure out something. But Trump is saying, I will not stop here. I will go to the next step of tariff, which is EU. This is where the EU important minister, she is saying, the finance officer, if you want to say, she's the foreign affairs and security official and manages what we call as the financial security of the EU. She's saying that if EU gets tariff barriers from the US, China is going to substitute everything which is coming from the US. So basically, in a way, China benefits because if you look at it, if there is a lot of disruption in Korea and Japan as of right now. The markets there are crashing also. They're showing negative growth because a lot of apprehension. Americans pushing in so many tariff barriers on EU will go for substitution. That substitution will happen from China. So Trump has to think this through because it seems that he's being impulsive because the global supply chain is already dominated by China. American products are sold in multiple other countries also. This is not the world where America is the only power which is supreme. EU will respond by tariffs on American products. America will get impacted and they will substitute that with Chinese products. That is why she's saying China will be laughing if for the trade war comes to the EU in that regard. So Trump is showing a lot of myopic vision here. Because he is not understanding that in the long run, this may impact America in the negative rather than positive. Because the more he plays these trade wars, the countries will then start to create trade barriers, which in turn will impact American imports into those countries and basically American exports in the long run. This is where this concept is problematic. And again, Trump is not actually looking at it in the larger perspective of things. So something again which is developing, much like the WHO concept. Let's see where this goes, but he is going to give us new current affairs every week in that regard. And this is where Trump is being true to his character. He said he will start a trade war. He said that he will remove himself or America from WHO. He said that he will withdraw from Paris Climate Agreement. He said that he will disrupt the global supply chain in China's domination, not understanding how this is actually going to impact in the larger context of things. That is where we have to understand how this pans out. Let's see. Thereafter, we move to two small but interesting topics. One is with regards to an amendment. I hope everybody is with me. And we all are on the same page with regards to these three topics related to Trump. Now we're coming back to the other aspects of India and forest, a very important concept here. Yes? Okay. Now, when we talk about forest, the definition of forest matters. Now, recently there was an amendment pushed into the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, and the Supreme Court had multiple litigations which were there on the concept of how you define a forest. And finally, the Supreme Court has said that you have to go by the dictionary definition of forest, not your own. Now, basically, there was a section 1A which was introduced in the Act, which tried to dilute the definition of forest by saying anything which can be understood as a forest under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 is declared forests or lands recorded as forests in government records after 1980, which means that if it is obviously a forest, but it is not a declared forest and it is not a forest according to government records, it can be cut, which is problematic because surveying of forest itself is a very difficult process. This is where they said that government of India said that no, we are not pushing in 1A because we want to dilute. We just wanted to make it more comprehensive so that we can add local bodies, territorial bodies, union territory, the state also declaring. But activists started to say that you are trying to argue that whatever is not declared as a forest, whatever is not a forest according to government records, can then be cut without compensatory afforestation. This became a contagious issue and went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has very straightforward said that we cannot let you use this definition, and a very important judgment is quoted. They said that you have to revert back to the dictionary meaning of forest, which came through in 1996 in what is called as the T.N. Godavarman Tirumal case. T.N.G. Tirumal case is the one on which they want to go with the definition. Now you have to note this, very important. This case is the one which is creating precedence in which forest has a meaning of any green cover not having a certain criteria based on it. Meaning the forest which was defined in the 1996 judgment was basically preserve green expanses irrespective of the nature. Declared, non-declared does not matter. Supreme Court is very simply saying that the Forest Conservation Act amendment is in a way unconstitutional because it is trying to push in a further criteria to define the forest itself. That should not be the case. And this is where the dictionary meaning of the forest should be aligned rather than the new meaning which has been pushed. And whilst doing this, the Supreme Court also said that you cannot cut forests without doing compensatory afforestation. So now again, this should have been the job of the National Green Tribunal NGT, but Supreme Court got so many litigation because of this Forest Conservation Act that they have now said, the bench has very simply said, and I quote, we will not allow you to reduce the forest area. You cannot use any forest land for linear projects. If you are using any area for these projects, the same amount of land must be given for compensatory afforestation. But the problem is CAMPA itself is problematic, which is Compensatory Afforestation Authority and Act, because the forest cut in the Western Ghats and afforestation in MP is not equal because the biodiversity of these two sectors are different. But the idea is, this is very important because the dilution of section 1 by 1A is now being stopped by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has intervened to change the concept itself and argue that we cannot let you change the definition of forests. This is a very important question which with regards to Great Nicobar, with regards to Panna Tiger Reserve has been coming through. Is the ecological cost better or worse, more or less than the development cost of these projects? And compensatory afforestation is now coming into more context more and more as we go on forward. This is again interesting and important. So you have to note section 1A, Forest Conservation Act 1980, dilution, Supreme Court has intervened, and please do remember this case, T.N. Godavarman Tirumpad case. Very, very, very important because the Supreme Court has created precedence that this is going to be the way we are going to talk about. Now, if you understand all of this, let's move to the last article. An interesting one again. For the past 5 to 6 years, we've been hearing about a certain, you can say, asteroid Bennu and a certain NASA project. It is called OSIRIS-REx. OSIRIS-REx and the what we call as asteroid Bennu. Now, as part of the project, NASA sent us, you can say, probe and satellite into the orbit of Bennu in the form of OSIRIS-REx, and it wanted to understand the way this asteroid had a mineral content, or what is the, you can say, mineral composition of Bennu. So, as part of the project, OSIRIS-REx actually tried to land, took some rocks and then send it back to India. So, send it back to the world rather, India. And in 2020, the samples were collected And in 2023, these samples were delivered to Earth and delivered to the NASA through a probe. Now, Bennu was considered to be important because what scientists believe is that the chemical composition of the what we call as Bennu has certain chemicals which are critical for life. The building blocks of life can be seen in Bennu, and that has now been confirmed. It has been confirmed that the chemical composition in two different articles, the chemical composition of Bennu, the rocks which we found, one shows a certain chemical formation when salty water evaporates, it leaves out a certain residue. We found that residue, not water itself, but that same type. And we also found 14 of the 20 amino acids needed for DNA and RNA formation. So this means that most probably life on Earth was seeded by an asteroid like Bennu because it introduced certain chemicals into the Earth's atmosphere and into the Earth's crust, which in turn led to single cell organisms and further evolution into what we are today. So the idea is very simple. The idea is there was a theory that asteroids based seeding of planets is the cause for organisms to develop, for life to develop. This has now been confirmed from Bennu, and this also means that there could be further multiple planets which were impacted by certain asteroids, which in turn could lead to life formation. They may be in nascent stage, but the idea is very simple. OSIRIS-REx project has now completed its course. It has also completed its task, which was to decide and in a way prove the theory that what we need for life, that chemical composition has been found on multiple asteroids. So before I end this class, I'll try to summarize everything for you. What we've understood is how 3 new types of jobs need to be created in India. That has been pointed out in the budget. We have to make sure we create jobs which are climate resilient. Second, we have to create jobs which take entrepreneurship into context. And we have to also create jobs which in a way are AI proof. This is important because if we don't create jobs like this, they will become obsolete in the long run. Second article, we try to understand ethanol blending, E10, E20, where does ethanol come from? We are using first generation ethanol and we are trying to move away from rice and sugar towards maize as a source of ethanol blending. Thereafter, maize production in India has been ramped up and it is important in the larger context of things. Thereafter, we went into 3 articles which together try to understand what is Trump doing. The perception of the people in the US has changed with regards to the WHO that has allowed Trump to leave WHO. But Trump leaving means 15% of the income of or receipts of the WHO will go with him. This may lead to a very big issue with regards to WHO, its projects and its funding. This may change the medical landscape of the world in that regard. Thereafter, we also saw that based on the idea of national security, he has put in tariffs on China, Canada and Mexico. China has said we will go to the WTO, all the best. Thereafter, Canada and Mexico are trying to broker some form of deal, but Trump is not going to stop here. He will go to EU also, he will put in tariff barriers, but tariff barriers may help the Chinese than actually impact the Chinese. In the larger context of things, we also understand Section 1A, which was added to the Forest Conservation Act 1980, which was a dilution of the concept of forest itself. And this is where the Supreme Court has entered and said, no, based on 1996 judgment, you cannot qualify what is a forest. Use the dictionary definition of forest, which is any green patch, without qualifying its nature. And last but not the least, we have also understood that OSIRIS-REx, a very important NASA project, has finally completed its job of sending, or rather it was initially intended to prove that life on any planet can be seeded by asteroids because they have a certain chemical composition. That has now been done with regards to how they have pushed certain form of what we call as chemical composition based data, which says amino acids and the other forms of chemical needed for life are also available. So on this note, I'll end this session. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you soon with another set of issues. Thank you, take care, and do become a part of UAIPMT. The PPT will be available in the Telegram channel indicated in the beginning. Thank you, take care, bye-bye.